Good afternoon and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to this curator conversation with Laurie Barnes. My name is Glenn Tomlinson, and I'm the William Randolph Hearst Chief Officer of Learning and Community Engagement here at the Norton Museum. It's my pleasure to introduce Laurie Barnes, who will discuss her special exhibition currently on view at the museum called Transcending Boundaries. Laurie Barnes is an art historian specializing in Chinese ceramics and their impact on world cultures. And I'm delighted to tell you that she's also the Elizabeth B. McGraw Curator of Chinese Art here at the Norton Museum. She has been our colleague since 2006. Among her many responsibilities, she has enhanced, managed, and served as an ambassador for the most important collection of Chinese art in the southeastern United States, with strengths in the areas of archaic jades and bronzes, as well as Qing Dynasty imperial jades. She has acquired over 70 works of art for the museum's collection during her time with us, from ancient lacquerware to monumental Ming Dynasty paintings. Her research into the collection has resulted in over 25 thematic exhibitions and a variety of complementary programs. Chinese Moon and New Year festivals among the best attended of these programs and annual special events here at the museum for many years. Prior to her work at the Norton, from 1989 to 2005, Laurie worked at the Detroit Institute of the Arts as the assistant and then associate curator of Asian art. Laurie received her Bachelor of Science in Art History and Studio Art at Harding University in Arkansas, and her MA in Chinese Art History from the University of Texas at Austin. She's received fellowships for international study in Beijing, Taipei, and Seoul, and has authored numerous catalogs, essays, and articles, including the Norton Museum's reinstallation of the Chinese galleries in 2019, the special exhibition High Tea, Glorious Manifestations, East and West in 2015, and she was a major contributor to the authoritative publication Chinese Ceramics from the Paleolithic Period to the Qing Dynasty, published by Yale University and the Foreign Language Press in Beijing. Laurie, it's a pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you, Glenn, and thank you all for attending this presentation for Transcending Boundaries, Chinese Women Painters from Dynastic Times to the Modern Era, which is this installation is 4 paintings on view in the Niblack Gallery until May 29th, 2022. It features one work attributed to Guandao Sheng, one by Ru Wenshu, who's a Ming Dynasty woman painter, and then two early 20th century Chinese women painters, Yang Xuezhou and Lu Xiaoman. The title for this exhibition, Transcending Boundaries, is derived from a quote which is attributed to Guandao Sheng, and she said, "To play with a brush and ink is a masculine sort of thing to do, yet I have done this painting. Wouldn't some say that I have transgressed? How despicable, how despicable." All of these women transcended boundaries and created the works that we are going to be exploring. Guandao Sheng is renowned for depictions of bamboo and credited with being the most famous woman painter and calligrapher in Chinese history. Next slide, please. The painting on the left side is the painting on view that's attributed to Guandao Sheng, and it's on view at the Norton right now. I should say that it's generally now thought by most scholars that there are no extant works from Guandao Sheng's hand. They're all believed to be copies of works by Guandao Sheng, and the one on view is no exception. And indeed, the one even on the right-hand side, which is in the Palace Museum in Taipei, is the same. But all of these copies are references to Guan Daosheng's masterful skill, and later we'll be looking at a poetic inscription on the painting by Ru Wenshu, which also references Guan Daosheng's masterful skill. And this painting and the painting by Ru Wenshu are a testament to how Guan transcended gender boundaries. I think it's interesting to note that the painting on view at the Norton, even though it's a copy, we can trace through the collector's seals. It was in two important Chinese collections. One was the collection of the Qing scholar Bao Xi, who lived from 1871 to 1930. And then the other, this painting also bears seals from the painter Zhang Ershi, who is also known as Zhang Jian, who lived from 1913 to 1972. Zhang Ershi was a noted painter and pupil of Huang Binghong, who was one of the last great literati painters. Zhang Ershi followed the traditional practice of studying and copying the works of old masters and assimilating the style of his teacher. So I think it's important to note that even though this is a copy, it was in some fairly eminent collections. And next slide, please. Now I want to look a little bit at the inscription on this painting attributed to Guan Daosheng. The bamboo and rock depicted in this painting are symbols of moral integrity and rectitude. The inscription, purportedly penned by Guan, sends good wishes to her husband, Zhao Mengfu, who lived from 1254 to 1332. And Zhao Mengfu was a major figure in China's lineage of scholar painters, and we'll be looking at one of his most famous paintings in a few minutes. The inscription on this painting, Bamboo and Rock, attributed to Guan Daosheng, is translated as follows. May the Imperial Senior Minister, Snow Pine, which was Zhao Mengfu's literary name, receive 100 everlasting, sincerest blessings from his wife. May you prosper in a manner like the stone formerly set in front of in there is signature and seal on the painting. It's the signature is wife, which is the style name Hello? Hello? Hello?
Hi, Laurie. You're back. I apologize to our audience. We just lost Laurie's transmission as she was beginning to discuss this painting in depth, particularly with the inscription. So perhaps, Laurie, if you can resume there, that would be great.
With this slide
Yes.
of the inscription. Great. Okay, I will back up. I'm not sure at what point I lost you, so I will resume with this slide. In this slide, I'll be going through the inscription on this painting of a bamboo and rock, which is attributed to Guandaosheng. The bamboo and the rock are symbols of moral integrity and rectitude. In the inscription, purportedly penned by Guan, she sends good wishes to her husband, Zhao Mengfu, who lived from 1254 to 1322. Zhao was a major figure in China's lineage of scholar painters. The inscription on this painting can be translated as follows. May Imperial Senior Minister Snowpine, which was Zhao's literary name, receive 100 everlasting sincerest blessings from his wife. May you prosper in a manner like the stone formerly set in front of West Vermilion Creek. And following that inscription is the title of the painting, ink painting of bamboo and rock, and then her signature, second wife, which was the style name of Guandaosheng, and she was the second wife of Zhao Mengfu, and then her seal, wife of Zhao Mengfu, Lord of the State of Wei, which was Zhao Mengfu's honorary title, and then her surname, Guan. Next slide, please. I mentioned that Zhao Mengfu was a major painter, and I just wanted to show you a copy of a portrait of Zhao Mengfu and an example. The painting on the right-hand side is probably Zhao Mengfu's most famous painting, and it is entitled "Autumn Colors on Chue and Hua Mountains." And according to Zhao's inscription on this painting, he notes that it was painted for a close friend by the name of Zhou Mi, who was one of the literati who refused to serve the Yuan court. Zhao Mengfu, like many other scholars, did choose to serve the Yuan court. Zhou was a connoisseur and painter who settled in the southeastern city of Hangzhou, and he had the nickname of the Hermit of Mount Hua, Buzhu, abbreviated as Mount Hua. Zhou's ancestors were from Shandong province in the northeast, an area that Zhou had never seen in person. However, Zhao traveled there to Zhou's ancestral homeland as part of his official duties and painted this hand scroll for Zhou. So I hope that gives you a little bit of an idea of why paintings were painted. And the painting on view by Guandaosheng was obviously painted to give to her husband. And this famous painting by Zhao Mengfu was painted to give to a friend. And below this painting, I just inserted a couple of the painting that Zhao Mengfu gave to his friend. I inserted a couple of images of what Mount Chue and Mount Hua look like today, which is actually quite similar to the way they look in the painting by Zhao Mengfu dated 1295. Next slide, please. Unlike, there are no portraits that exist of Guandaosheng, But it was more typical at the time when Guan Sheng was alive not to do self-portraits, but paint imagery that reflected your inner spirit. And that is what I believe Guan Sheng's paintings of bamboo, which is she's most renowned for, were doing. And this is a detail of a painting, Bamboo Groves in Mist and Rain, dated 1308, which was formerly believed to be by the hand of Guan Sheng, but as I mentioned before, no paintings in existence that bear Guan Sheng's signature are now believed to be from her hand. They're all believed to be copies. Next slide, please. This is just a further detail showing the delicacy and lyricism of Guan Sheng's, that Guan Sheng was renowned for in painting bamboo and then the mist and the rain. Next slide, please. One more painting on the left-hand side that's attributed to Guan Sheng of bamboo, and this one was one that was bears a date of 1312 and was offered at auction in China in 2012. And I also think that it's interesting to note that the tomb of Guan Sheng and Zhao Mengfu is surrounded by bamboo, in very much looking very much like the paintings of bamboo that Guan Sheng that are attributed to Guan Sheng. And this is in Deqing County, city of Huzhou in Zhejiang province. Next slide, please. Next, we move on to the painting by the Ming Dynasty artist Ru Wenshu, who lived from 1573 to 1633. Its title is Stately Tree and Cultivated Bamboo. And the inscription by a late Qing scholar Zhou Yanru, which you can see on the right-hand side, references the masterful skills of Guan Sheng and Ru Wenshu, and is further evidence of how both Guan and Ru Wenshu transcended gender boundaries. His inscription, and again, it's a poetic inscription, but this one was written by him, not by anyone else. After a rain shower, the Qi River garden is refreshingly green. A stone is cleverly set next to an ancient tree. Exquisite ink paintings of earlier times that offer insight into the artist's soul are rare. This work transmits the artist Ru Wenshu's spirit. Lady Guan Zhongji, which was Guan Sheng's another name that Guan Sheng was known by, her innovative compositions of ancient tree with young bamboo are exquisite crowning achievements of the past Yuan era. Many of her followers could not capture her spiritual essence. Only the air of the lyrical brushwork in this painting, which is Ru Wenshu's painting, is in consonance with Guan Sheng's greatness. As I see it, only this artist, Ru Wenshu, succeeds. Therefore, I compose this poem, noting my observations. And then it ends with a date written in the Library of the Wintry Pine, Tianxi second year, which is equivalent to 1622, 9th month, 3rd day. And then it is signed Zhou Yanru and bears his seal, the seal of Zhou Yanru. Next slide. I should also, back up one. The inscription on the in the center that's enlarged is Ru Wenshu's inscription on this painting, which gives her it gives the title "Stately Trees and Cultivated Bamboo," and it states that it was painted by Wenshu of the Ru family, and then it's also signed "Dwelling among Fragrant Orchids," which was her style name, and then her seal, Ru family, Wenshu. Next slide, please. Because again, we have no portraits of Ru Wenshu, I wanted to try to give you a sense of a little bit more background into who she was. There's a small red dot on the map at the bottom right-hand corner that is it pinpoints where Ru Wenshu lived, and it's a town called Lilijun, which is south of Suzhou, and it's also a canal city like Suzhou. And then in the upper center, you see the carved stone gateway of the entrance to the Ru family home in Lilijun, which still exists today. And then on the far right, upper in the upper zone is the interior of that gateway. And then in the lower level, you can see the alleyway that leads to the Ru family residence. And then there's a bridge. The next inset is the bridge from the former Ru mansion across the canal. And then there's the canal with that bridge in the distance, again at the bottom. And if anyone goes there and wants to see it, the address is Lihua Street, Ru Family Lane, number 2. And Ru Wenshu is a notable late Ming painter. She was of the 11th generation of the Ru family, and the ancestral home of the Ru family was at Beilou, Lichuan County in Jiangxi province. Her ancestor, Ru Changzhi, who lived from 1276 to 1364, which was during the time when Guan Sheng was alive, moved the family to Lilijun because he believed the family would prosper there. And indeed they did. Ru Wenshu's father was Ru Zhoushu. Next slide, please. At age 19, Ru Wenshu married scholar Mao Yisui. Mao was engaged in the study of music and lyrics, especially Kunchu opera. Together, Ru and Mao made considerable contributions to late Ming Dynasty art and culture. And in this slide, you see a map of Lilijun, which illustrates that it is indeed a canal city. And on the right-hand side, you can see Mao Family Lane. About 57% of the old town in Lilijun is named after eminent families of Lilijun, and the Mao family was also one of them. I call your attention in this slide in this alleyway to the well in the middle of the alley, and because you'll see it in some illustrations that well like that in some illustrations that Ru Wenshu did for a book which was co-authored by her husband Mao Yisui. Next slide, please. And that I apologize for the blurriness of the illustration, but in the first slide on the left-hand side, you can see a well with a bucket on the top of it in an illustration by Ru Wenshu for a book, new focus on the old classic of the Romance of the Western Chamber, which was co-authored by her husband, Mao Yi-sui. It was published in 1614, and you can sometimes buy original copies, but it also exists in reprints, which the image in the center and the one on the right-hand side are probably reprints. The one on the left side is probably an original edition. This book by which was the other author was Mao Yi-sui's friend Wang Jide, is a commentary on the Romance of the Western Chamber, which is a yuan drama by the playwright, and again, we're going back to the Yuan dynasty, Wang Shifu, who lived from 1250 to 1337. Next slide, please. Now we're moving on to the paintings by early 20th century women artists, and the first is Yang Xuezhou. And Yang Xuezhou, like Guan Daosheng, was the daughter of a father who had no sons. And so both Guan Daosheng's father and Yang Xuezhou's father gave their daughters traditional classical Chinese educations that were generally reserved for males. And those classical Chinese educations always included study of painting and literature. Yang Xuezhou was the fourth daughter of the famous Qing Dynasty, late Qing Dynasty scholar Yang Baimin, who founded the Chendong Girls' School because he had no sons and desired to give his daughters a classical Chinese education. In 1934, Yang Xuezhou and Lu Xiaoman, a landscape by Lu Xiaoman is also included in this exhibition, which we'll be looking at in a few minutes, of Green Mountains, were founding members of the Chinese Women's Painting and Calligraphy Association, and were friends in that way. In this painting, I should mention that Yang Xuezhou is best known for her landscapes, and in this painting she draws inspiration from a poem by Ouyang Xu, which she reproduces on this painting. Ouyang Xu lived from 1007 to 1072, and both the imagery and the poem on this painting take the viewer on a passage through the mountains. The poetic inscription, Yang Xuezhou's inscription begins with the poetic quatrain, Distant Mountains by Ouyang Xu. And I'll read a translation of that. Mountains have no near or far as I gazed at them on the move all day. The peaks and cliffs look different from every angle, and I, the traveler, do not know their names. That's the end of the poem. It is believed that Ouyang Xu wrote this poem on his way to exile in 1036 by saying that he does not know the names of the mountains, although the locals certainly would have. He indicates that he finds this place distressingly unfamiliar. And I believe that Yang Xuezhou, by writing this poetic quatrain on this painting, is writing a commentary that she's finding the times that she was living in when she painted this painting, which we know was done sometime before 1949. She finds the times that she's living in distressingly unfamiliar. And you have to remember that these, in the 1940s, World War II had just ended, and China was occupied by Japan, and it was just really uncertain times. Then, after this poetic inscription, she signs the painting. Painted by Yang Shuizhou, a native of Fengxi, which is a district of Shanghai, in her studio in Shuilu, which can be translated Snow Chant Lodge, and that in Shanghai. And then there are two seals, which you can see on the lower left. One is, there's her surname, Yang, and the other one, her given name, Xuejiu. Next slide. I wanted to just give you a little bit more information and insights into the Yang Shuizhou and her family. So in the upper right, you see a photograph of Yang Shuizhou with her father in the center, Yang Baimin, and her sister Yang Shijin on the right. And I should also mention that Yang Baimin's grandfather, Zhu Menglu, was also a painter. So you have this tradition of a family tradition of scholar painting. And then the painting, the photograph in the center is a photograph of Yang Baimin's wife, whose name was Zhen Mianyi, and their 6 daughters. And then the 3 daughters that were painters are identified: Yang Shuiyao, Yang Shuizhou, and Yang Shuizhen. And then I give you a couple. Yang Shuizhen was known for her calligraphy. Yang Shuiyao was known for kind of bird and flower subjects, and Yang Shuizhou is known for her landscapes. And in 1921, Yang Shuiyao and Yang Shuizhou held a sister painting exhibition in Japan. Yang Shuizhou was already selling her paintings at age 15 when she graduated from Transcending Girls' School, and where she studied literature and art, because that was part of a classical Chinese education. In 1918 and 1924, she held personal painting exhibitions at Beijing Central Park to raise support for the Transcending Girls' School. In 1929, she participated in the first National Art Exhibition, and the painting, which is at the bottom right, Watching Waterfalls, this is just a detail of it, was exhibited in that painting, in that exhibition, sorry. In 1930, there was a couples painting exhibition held in Japan, and paintings by Yang Shuizhou's husband, Yue Yang, were exhibited with hers. I should note that all of the women painters in this exhibition, their husbands, with the exception of Yang Shuizhou, all of their husbands were arguably more famous than they were. But Yang Shuizhou is, based on what I could find in doing research, Yang Shuizhou is better known than her husband, Yue Yang. Next slide, please. I mentioned the Chinese Women's Painting and Calligraphy Association, which was an important organization for women painters in Shanghai. It was established in 1934, and I thought I'd show you a few pictures taken on the day that it was established in 1934. And it in the pictures on the day it was established, one shows one photograph has 23 members and another one has 27 members. But this organization grew to over 200 members, making it the largest association of women painters in the history of Chinese art. Yang Shuiyao, Yang Shuizhou's older sister, was on the executive committee, and Yang Shuizhou was a standing member, and Lu Xiaoman, who we'll be looking at discussing in a few minutes, was on the publicity committee, and both Yang Shuizhou and Lu Xiaoman were founding sponsors, which you will see in a photograph in just a few minutes. Next slide, please. These are, I mentioned that Yang Shuizhou is best known for her landscapes, so I wanted to show you a few, including on the lower right, the whole of the hand scroll, Watching the Waterfall, which I mentioned was exhibited in that exhibition in Beijing. And it's now in the Shanghai Museum of Literature and History. But this just gives you an idea of the scope of Yang Shuizhou's important landscapes. Next slide, please. The final artist in this grouping for Transcending Boundaries is Lu Xiaoman. She lived from 1903 to 1965, and her work is represented in this installation by Green Mountains and White Clouds, which she painted in 1946. Again, like the painting we just looked at by Yang Shuizhou, she chooses a poem by an earlier artist to write on her painting. And this poem is by Xie Jin, who lived from 1369 to 1450. And both Xie's poem and Lu's painting express the longings of a weary soul. Both Xie and Lu lived in the limelight in uncertain times. Lu lived a tumultuous life as a celebrated painter, writer, singer, and actress, while Xie was a gifted, high-ranking scholar who ran afoul of the emperor. Similar sentiments about living in distressingly unfamiliar surroundings are expressed in the landscape Distant Mountains, which we've just looked at, by her friend Yang Shuizhou. And the inscription on this, the translated poetic inscription on this painting is, what tired traveler does not love green mountains, which are a secluded retreat? Unconcerned about fame in this world, a string of white clouds rests on the mountains. Allow me to flow like water in a stream and leave the world of humans. Then the signature on this painting is painted by Xiaoman, native of Wujin, which is a district in the city of Changzhou in Jiangsu province, in July 1946. And then it bears three of Lu Xiaoman's seals, which can be translated as beautiful person, and then her name, Lu Xiaoman, and then the third, joyfully wielded brush. Next slide, please. This is the other founding day photograph that I mentioned for the Chinese Women's Painting and Calligraphy Association. And here are Lu Xiaoman and Yang Shuizhou identified in this photograph, and quite close to each other. And with this slide, I wanted to tell you a little bit more about Lu Xiaoman's family background. Her father was Lu Ding, who was born Lu Zhifu, and he lived from 1873 to 1930. At the end of the Qing dynasty, he passed the Zhuren scholar provincial examinations and was therefore qualified to participate in the metropolitan examinations in Beijing. But instead, he went on to graduate from Waseda University in Japan. During the Republican era, he served as director, counselor, and taxation senior advisor to the nationalist government for over 30 years. He was the principal founder of the China Savings Bank. So this tells you Lu Xiaoman came from a very wealthy family. And indeed, she was a very spoiled child. Lu Xiaoman's mother, Wu Manhua's ancestral home was in Changzhou in Jiangsu province. Her mother was the eldest daughter of Wu Luhe, a deputy minister of education for the southern area of Jiangsu province. Her mother's ancestor, Wu Guangyue, who lived from 1759 to 1832, was a Qing civil official who ended his career as the governor of Jiangxi province. So again, a family of very eminent scholars. Lu Xiaoman's mother, Wu Manhua, was a multi-talented woman and a Qing dynasty woman painter with a deep foundation in poetry, painting, and ancient literature. So that I'm sure she was a tremendous influence on Lu Xiaoman. Lu Xiaoman was born in 1903 in Shanghai and educated in Beijing. She was fluent in French and English. And with that, I want to introduce you in next slide, please, to a painting that is also on view, but not part of this installation, but has a relationship to this installation because this painting, which you see in the center, is also referencing a 13th century artist, male artist by the name of Ni Can. Ni Can was alive during the same century that Guandao, in the 1300s, when Guandao Sheng lived. And this painting, like the painting attributed to Guandao Sheng, is a copy referencing another famous painter of the Yuan dynasty, Ni Can. It is by, when I started working on this installation, it was thought that this was possibly by a woman artist. And the more I dug into it, it turns out to be by a male artist by the name of Zhou Lian, who lived from 1790 to sometime after 1865. The painting's title, which he gives in his inscription, which you can see on the right-hand side, is Xishan Pavilion. And the translation of that inscription is a painting of clouds and forests near Xishan Pavilion in Stone Valley, painted in the autumn of the Qing dynasty Xianfeng reign, Yimao year, which translates to 1855. Content, yet aware of the deficiencies and inadequacies in this representation of green pines and rocks painted in the south window scholar's studio, and then it's signed, remembered by Lian. And then there's his seal, fond of literature, which was Zhou Lian's style name. Zhou Lian was a Qing dynasty scholar and collector of books. So that gives you some insights into why he wrote this on this painting. But based on what he wrote on this painting, he's remembering a painting by somebody else. And if you study Chinese paintings, you know that this painting is definitely referencing the painter Ni Can. So I started combing through online references to paintings by Ni Can with the title of Xishan Pavilion and found the painting on the left-hand side, which was sold at auction in Beijing in 2017. I think it's quite possible that that Jolien saw this painting that is supposedly believed to be by Nitan. Next slide, please. I wanted to show you one more painting by Nitan on the left-hand side, because the hut in the foreground of Jolien's paintings is more like the one on the left-hand side, which is Shishan Pavilion, Mirror of the Mind, which is dated 1355 and believed also to be by Nitan, and was offered at auction in Beijing in 2006. So this just kind of drives home how scholars, both men and women, throughout history referenced not only poetry, but also imagery in their works, which sought to build upon tradition. Next slide, please. With this, I conclude my presentation and would like to give the floor back to Glenn for questions.
Thank you, Laurie. Again, fascinating talk. And a couple of questions. I think you've answered a question that we frequently hear while leading tours of the galleries, and that is about the similarities that people see in one painting versus another, or in comparison with another. That these artists really were looking back to traditions and trying to emulate those traditions. Is that right?
Yeah, emulate, but not just emulate. If you were early in your career as a painter, you would emulate, you would copy. But as you became more confident and established, then you would try to build upon tradition and infuse that tradition with something new from yourself. And we can, and if we want to back up to the slides of Jolien, I think they're a good illustration of that, particularly this one, Greg, yeah, right here. The rocky outcropping in the background of the painting in the center by Jolien is referencing the rocky outcropping, I think, the rocky outcropping in the painting, which is supposedly painted by Nitan in 1372. It's not the same, but both the composition, the organization of the foreground and the background with the stream in the middle, he's referencing it. And even in his inscription, he said he's content yet aware of the deficiencies and inadequacies of his representation. But by titling his painting a painting of clouds and forests near Shishan Pavilion in Stone Valley, he's clearly referencing the paintings of Nitan.
Thanks. Another question. Guandao Shan, you mentioned that many scholars feel that none of her paintings are still extant. There are some that are attributed to her. And I'm just wondering how an attribution can be made without an example of the artist's style at hand.
Well, she's written about quite often, as we saw in that inscription on the painting by Ru Wenshu. And we know about her works based on that, but basically we know about her works based on these copies, which it's believed, obviously based on the provenance that I traced for Guandao Shan's, the painting attributed to Guandao Shan, that was thought to be a good enough copy that it was in two pretty prominent late Qing, two prominent 20th century collections.
Mhm.
One of a Qing scholar and another of a noted painter.
So in contrast to Guan Shan, with Ru Wenshu, we have several. How many of her works still exist?
Paintings by Ru Wenshu are very rare. I only know of one other painting in the United States by Ru Wenshu, and then there is that book, which is not a painting, but it
Mhm.
it's an woodblock printed illustration. And then a number of years ago, there was an album that was sold in Beijing. But works by her are quite rare.
With the
So
book,
I'm really delighted to have this one in
oh, it's
installation.
it's wonderful. It's wonderful and very exciting to have here. The book, was that the only illustration in the book, or are there other wood
No,
blocks?
it's a whole book of illustration. I haven't laid my hands on the book, which was published in 1614, but I just I just knew that she had illustrated a book and looked online for illust and I picked illustrations from that book that had imagery that were related to the painting that we have on view. But
And
we can
before your talk, you and I were chatting about how many of these artists, um, and forgive me if I'm paraphrasing this incorrectly, but are known to us partly because of the support they received from their husbands. I would imagine that or fathers, and I would imagine that Mao's choice of Ru to create the illustrations for that book must have been quite a statement in and of itself.
yeah, I mean I think with the husbands of three of these artists uh, definitely contributed to their wives' fame. So that's Guan Daosheng, Ru Wenshu, and Lu Xiaoman. Lu Xiaoman was married to a very famous poet, Xu Zhimo. And really, after he died in a tragic plane crash, she spent the rest of her life preserving his legacy. Uh, but he also, while he was alive, really promoted her work as well. And then in with the Yang Shizhou, I think the way that her father educated his six daughters, and it seems like I think all of his daughters were fairly active, but I maybe uh, Yang Shizhou's granddaughter could answer more correctly than I, but I think that really it seems like of all of the daughters that Yang Shizhou was really a powerhouse in terms of being passionate about painting landscapes. So I'm
I'm
very delighted to be able to include a landscape by her to include with the landscape of Lu Xiaoman.
I'm fascinated by the association that you referenced, established in 1934, the Chinese Women's Painting and Calligraphy Association. How that got started, how long it survived, what sort of support it received from the community and other artists. But before we go there, we have a question. Could you please explain more about the meaning of transcending gender boundaries?
Um,
Thank you for the question.
the I the quote that I started with by from Guan Daosheng said that painting is a masculine thing to do. And, that just by a woman picking up her brush and daring to do this masculine thing was, at the time when she was alive, was considered despicable. But she was bold. And by doing so, she made a conscious choice to transcend gender boundaries. And I think because of the support that she received from Zhao Mengfu, that which she cultivated, which is obvious in the inscription on this painting. She esteemed him, and he highly esteemed her as well. We know that about him, and how he honored her wishes and promoted her work during her life. So that's the origin of the transcending gender boundaries. Hopefully that answers the question.
I think it does. Now, this installation will be on view until May 29th.
Greg, we can progress to the last slide if you want. It gives. Yeah. Oh,
there we are.
Yeah,
there
right
we
there.
are.
Yeah.
May 29th. And can you give us a sense of what will be on view in the Niblek Gallery after that?
There's the next installation proposed is Summer Silk. There's a recent gift of a Qing Dynasty man's silk gauze summer robe. And I will also be exhibiting a Qing Dynasty late Qing Dynasty women's silk gauze robe, both dyed with indigo vegetal dye. And then there will be an example of summer imagery, bird and flower subject as well. So it's called Summer Silk. Qing Dynasty summer robes and signs of the season.
Well, thank you.
Up next.
And one more question. Thanks for your interpretation. Do you think Guan Daosheng's subject bamboo is also a quote unquote masculine thing?
Yeah, kind of. Even though she's known for that, during the period when she lived during the Yuan Dynasty, which was the period when China was ruled by the Mongols, there was a subject that was called the Three Friends of Winter, and winter could be the winter season, or it could be times of hardship. And those three were pine tree, which survives many centuries and lots of hardship. Plum, which blooms before flowering plum, which blooms before any of the other flowers bloom in the springtime, and can even bloom when there's still snow on the ground. And then bamboo, which bends without breaking. So it's it can be twisted and turned, but it always springs back to its original form. So it's a sign of those three have been were often painted during the Yuan Dynasty and often referenced scholars' integrity and resilience in times of hardship.
Thank you, Laurie. Thank you, Ms. Hu, for your questions. And thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. Laurie, this was a pleasure. And we look forward to the next chance we have to share an hour with you and learn more about Chinese art. Thank you so much.
Thanks for joining us. Thank you all for coming.
And thank you so much for joining us for this curator conversation. Many of our programs now are live once again in person at the Norton Museum of Art, and we hope that you'll take a look at our website at norton.org for more information about upcoming programs. Thank you so much for joining us today, and have a wonderful day.